I know that was completely inappropriate for Lent. I'm just going to own it. But how did it make you feel? When we see the boy who has all the resources and he's not going to share and he's making fun of an elderly person in a motorized wheelchair and an infant, and then they take action and they do something to get to share in some resources, don't you feel a sense of righteousness? I mean, that was social justice right there. Now, a good commercial is designed to make us feel something. And if we don't feel anything, it's not a good commercial. But it can make you not only feel happy, but it can also make you feel not so good. But if it makes you feel something, it's done its job. And our reading today is very much like a commercial for Christianity, for a certain kind of Christianity. Now, we're in John's Gospel today, Harry read for us, and I want to remind you that John's Gospel is a gospel of layers. We don't ever want to read it just at the surface level. We always want to dig down and into those layers to discover that meaning. Scholars like Larry Paul Jones says that John's Gospel uses irony and directs us in one direction, and then when we think we've got it figured out, changes course and leaves us wondering, is that really what just happened? And how can that be right? It's an invitation to dig down into those layers. So today in our story, Jesus is heading toward Jerusalem, and he knows he is going to be executed. In John's Gospel, Jesus has all the power. He does not suffer. He knows exactly what he's doing, and everything is happening because he ordained it. But on his way, he stops at the one place that is home for him. He stops to see his beloved friends. He goes to see Lazarus and Mary and Martha, the one place that feels like home, where he's welcomed, where he's loved, where he's known. And as he gathers with them around the table, Mary comes and she has this jar of very expensive perfume. You heard the story. She opens the jar. She pours it onto his feet. Remember, he's reclining at the table, so his feet are stretched out behind him. And she rubs this ointment into his feet. It's a sensual picture. And then she does something scandalous. She takes her head covering off, and she lets her hair down. This is something a woman does not do with someone who is not her husband. And she rubs her hair on that oil, on Jesus' feet, sharing the scent from his body onto hers. So that in the days to come, whenever she misses Jesus, she has only to smell that fragrance on her hair, and she is with him again. It is a picture of devotion, love, adoration. Here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. It is a PDA. It is a personal display of affection that in school we're not supposed to do. It is over-the-top emotion. And guess what happens when we see somebody who has this over-the-top emotion? We get uncomfortable. And that's what happened to all those people around that table. Now, in this gospel, Judas is the one who speaks up. But there are anointing stories in the other Gospels as well. Especially Matthew's and Mark's Gospel. They are the closest stories to this one. But they don't take place in Lazarus' house. Jesus is in Simon the leper's home. Simon is also a Pharisee. We assume that Jesus healed him. And the woman is unnamed. We don't know who she is, but we know that she is sinful. And when she anoints Jesus' head or his feet, people around the table are not comfortable with that. It's not Judas that complains in the other gospel stories. It's everybody. It's Simon, the person who owns the home. It's all the disciples. It's whoever else is gathered around the table. They all say, what in the world? What a waste. Why is she doing that? We could have sold that ointment and given that money to the poor. I mean, isn't that what Jesus has been teaching them to do? To take care of the poor? Now, in this gospel, we know it's Judas who says these words. And we have the narrator whispering in our ears, Did anybody notice the parentheses around a couple of the lines in our reading? I got a thumbs up. That's the narrator, and he's whispering into our ears, this is the guy who's going to betray Jesus. This guy steals from the treasury bag. He doesn't really care about the poor. So the narrator is painting a picture that tells us that Mary is good and Judas is bad. Now this is typical John's gospel. John loves these dichotomies, these opposites. We have good and we have evil. We have light and we have dark. And we are called as the reader, as the listener, to choose. Which one will you be? Will you be the Mary who just adores Jesus, praise and worship, prayer and song? Actually, she doesn't say a word in this gospel. But are we also called to be Judas, in a way, to give to the poor? And this narrator wants us to choose Mary. It's pretty obvious. Now, those are feelings that are evoked. Who do you want to be like? Do you want to be like Mary? Or do you want to be like the one who betrays Jesus? It's an easy choice for us, isn't it? We all want to be like Mary because the narrator has helped us feel that way. Just like a good commercial writer. You don't want to eat these chips, you want to eat Doritos, and here's why. Because Doritos is active in social justice, and we taste great, and we're fun, and there's music going on, and you're also entertained, so this is why you want Doritos. This is why you want to be like Mary. Now, emotions are so important because we are emotional creatures. We are largely emotional in that if our emotions are hooked, we are hooked, and we will change our behavior. We think that, because we have this prefrontal cortex and we can rationalize things and we can be logical. We think that's what guides us, but what actually guides us is the way we feel. People have said nobody will remember what you say to them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And that's absolutely true. And church has used this idea for centuries. Now let's go back to 1741, because something significant happened in this country before we were even a country. Prior to 1741, if you went to church, you would sit in hard seats, some things never change, and you would say prayers, and there'd be a very ritualistic worship that happened, and then the minister would climb up some stairs to a very high pulpit and preach a very academic sermon that really didn't pierce your heart at all, and then climb back down and we would finish the ritual, and that was church. But in 1741, something happened to change that. That person's name is Jonathan Edwards, and he preached a sermon called In the Hands of an Angry God, Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God. Do you remember? Does that sound familiar? Edwards uses rhetoric, some techniques like parallelism and vivid imagery and repetition to paint this picture of God holding out a hand with all of humanity on it over the fiery pits of hell where the demons are gaping jawed with drool coming out of their mouths and just waiting to devour us. And if God withdraws God's grace, we fall into the pit of fiery hell, and there's nothing that can save you then. And in his sermon, people are in hell talking to one another, saying, how did this happen? How did we end up in this place? We couldn't possibly have become like this. We did everything we could to not have this happen, and yet here we are, and no one can rescue us. One source said that Edwards had to stop his sermon a couple of times because people were shrieking and crying, and he needed them to quiet down so he could finish. Some people ran out of the church that day. They were terrified. The emotion was fear. And he did a wonderful job creating so much fear that the church was packed the next week. And churches all over the Midwest and the Northeast began to fill up with people who were terrified because there was such success with that hellfire and brimstone sermon that other ministers started doing it too. In fact, there were so many ministers preaching that way that there was a whole section in the New York territory that was called the Burnt Over District. Because you couldn't go anywhere without getting a sermon or a message from somebody telling you, you are a horrible sinner and you are going straight to hell. So you had better hope that God is going to give you grace. Now that worked for a while. A lot of years. In fact, it probably still works in some churches today. But people have changed, and we have evolved, and we have better information, and we read the Bible a little bit differently. And now, what we see is a shift that brings people into church. And that is, we tell people, maybe we don't, but some ministers tell people, if you want to have a really fulfilling life, if you want God to open doors of opportunity for you that you would otherwise have missed, if you want a healthy family, and if you want a good job, and if you want to be secure in the knowledge that you have lived this one life good and full and true, then come to our church, because we'll introduce you to Jesus. And Jesus will help you live that fulfilled life that you long for. You don't want to miss out. It's a different kind of fear. It's FOMO, fear of missing out, that brings people then to see, what is it in my life that I might be missing? I don't want to miss it. Now, if Jonathan Edwards is the poster child for the fiery sermons, Joel Osteen is the poster child for these life fulfillment sermons. He has a church that packs out 45,000 people a week. That's a lot of people. He's called the smiling pastor. And he doesn't talk about hell at all. Instead, he talks about all of your opportunities that are awaiting your commitment to Jesus to unlock. It's what people want to hear. It's how our emotions pull us in. Commercials do the same thing. So let's see now what Jesus has to say about this choice that the author of John's Gospel gives us. Is it going to be Mary or is it going to be Judas? Jesus at first says, leave her alone. He doesn't want Judas to criticize Mary. He says, leave her alone. And then he says something that is difficult for us to understand. He says, you will always have the poor with you. Now, churches and ministers and good Christians have used that line for decades or longer to justify doing nothing for the poor. Because Jesus said, you will always have the poor with you. You're never going to fix world hunger. You're never going to fix poverty. It's like throwing good dollars down the drain. It's not going to help. And we feel like he is affirming Mary and saying, if you just worship me, if you just adore me, if you just bow down, if you just pour the oil on my feet, if you just sing praise to me, that's all you have to do. Now, there are scholars who have looked at this text and wondered about it, because Jesus was always talking about helping the poor. There's a scholar named Stephen Shoemaker who said, if you look at what Jesus actually says here, you will always have the poor with you. That is a direct quotation from Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 11. Now, the gospel writers often do this. They often take words from the Hebrew scripture and they put those words into Jesus' mouth so that we are anchoring Jesus in his tradition. We understand that he was Jewish and that he knew those scriptures. But if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 11, and you read the whole text, it says, you will always have the poor with you. So open your hands and give to the poor and the needy in the land. Now that we know the context of what Jesus is saying, some scholars believe Jesus is affirming both of them. He's saying Mary can worship the way she wants to. Judas, leave her alone. And you, open your hand. Remember, Judas is accused of holding the money bag and only reaching in when he wants money. And Jesus here is saying, open your hand and give to the poor and the needy in your land. They're both right. They're both right. Jesus is affirming both ways. And as I look around at us, I think we are too. If Judas were here today, he might look at our stained glass windows and say, "Why did you spend all that money on stained glass windows? You could have donated all that money to Habitat for Humanity and built a house for someone. And did you really need new carpet? What was wrong with the wooden floor? Seriously, you could have taken all this money for the new carpet and the hymnals and the grand piano, and you could have done good works in the land to take care of the poor." But in this verse, I think Jesus is saying we need both. We need to worship. We need to feel connected. We need to have a place that feels safe, where we can gather, where we can worship, where we can be together. And we need to help the poor, because the poor are always around us. And then there's a twist that some scholars see and think is significant. And they believe that when Jesus said, "Leave her alone, she is doing something beautiful for me," Jesus is identifying himself as the poor. And when she pours the ointment on his feet, she is giving it to the poor. She's giving it to Jesus. Because remember, Jesus is going to be executed within days. And he knows that. The world outside for him is tumultuous. The Romans are occupying the land. People are being crucified, hundreds a day sometimes by the Romans. It's a horrendous place to be, much like, we might argue, our own world right now. And he went to a home looking for a place where he could be loved and welcomed and safe, where he could gather around the table, where he could be adored, where he could talk to people he loved. It's as if he stepped out of the world for a moment and comes into a place where he can feel everything he needs so that he can go back out and face that road to Jerusalem and face his own execution. And so I'm wondering today, what are the emotions outside in your life that you can come into this place and kind of press the pause button on those emotions and those fears and those concerns, and come here and get what you need? And what is it you need here? What are the emotions that you want to feel here in this place? Because you are feeling something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be back today. If you walked into a church and you didn't feel anything at all, you would leave and you'd say, "That's a dead church," and you'd never go back. But there is something that you're feeling. And I want you to pay attention to it today. What is it that you feel? What is it that you need to feel when you're here? Think about that and tell someone what it is.